Imagine discovering that America's most powerful financial institution, the one shaping interest rates, money supply, and every major crisis response didn't start with transparency, but with secrecy, not with publicity, but with private drafts, not with public debate, but with a meeting hidden on an isolated island. What if the story we were taught about the Federal Reserve was only the surface layer? What if a deeper mechanism, quiet, technical, and largely invisibly, is the real engine behind every boom, every bust, and every rescue? Before we start, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? This community spans the globe, and the more people who understand hidden financial history, the harder it is for oversimplified narratives to dominate. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button for the unfiltered story behind the world's financial systems. Now, let's begin. To understand the Federal Reserve, you must first understand what came before it: chaos. Before 1913, the American banking system was like the Wild West. Individual banks issued their own notes, creating a confusing and unstable financial landscape. When panic struck, liquidity would dry up almost instantly. Confidence would collapse in a matter of days. The Panic of 1907 was the final straw. Banks were failing left and right. Depositors, terrified of losing their life savings, were rushing to withdraw their money, creating a vicious cycle. And in the middle of this chaos, one man stepped in to coordinate a rescue: the legendary financier J.P. Morgan. He gathered the nation's top bankers in his private library in New York City, locked the doors, and over the course of one long night, literally decided which institutions would live and which would die. He strong-armed his colleagues into pooling their resources to save the system. It was a display of immense private power, patching a catastrophic public failure. Sound familiar? This event set a crucial precedent. When private power becomes the only solution to a public crisis, the government often steps in to formalize that system. The official response to the Panic of 1907 became the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Officially, its purpose was to create a more stable and flexible financial system to prevent future panics. Unofficially, it was designed to concentrate financial control into a permanent, centralized structure. And here's the part of the story that is rarely discussed in public. The blueprint for the Fed wasn't drafted in the halls of Congress with open debate. It was conceived in total secrecy. In November 1910, a small, elite group of bankers and government officials boarded a private train car under the cover of darkness. They used fake names and told their families they were going on a duck hunting trip. Their destination was Jekyll Island, a private resort off the coast of Georgia, owned by men like J.P. Morgan, William Rockefeller, and other titans of industry. For 10 days, they met in a literal no-notes, no-leaks environment. Their mission was to design America's central banking system away from public scrutiny. Their goal was not just to create a lender of last resort. It was to create a mechanism that would control the flow of liquidity through a select group of powerful institutions, a feature that would define every crisis response for the next century. This structure would give a handful of privileged banks early preferential access to liquidity during a crisis. And as history has shown time and time again, early access is survival. But the public narrative was simple and reassuring: we're preventing panics. Sound familiar? It's a story we hear again and again. Now, let's fast forward and look at the century after the Fed's creation in 1913. Notice the pattern. Every major financial crisis has served to expand the Federal Reserve's power and influence. In 1929, the Great Depression normalized the idea of Fed intervention in the economy on a massive scale. In 1934, gold was centralized under government control, further detaching the dollar from a hard asset and giving policymakers more control. In 1971, President Nixon officially unpegged the dollar from gold, ushering in the era of pure fiat currency and giving the Fed even more flexibility to expand the money supply. In 1987, the stock market crash, known as Black Monday, was met with massive liquidity injections from the Fed to rescue the system. In 2008, the global financial crisis led to over $7 trillion in emergency lending and asset purchases, an unprecedented expansion of the Fed's balance sheet. And in 2020, in response to the global pandemic, the Fed expanded its balance sheet by another $3 trillion in just a few months. The pattern is unmistakable. Crisis centralizes power. Crisis expands the control over liquidity. And crisis widens the gap between those who have first access to this newly created credit and those who do not. Sound familiar yet? Let's look at the foundational architecture of the Federal Reserve. It includes key features like the discount window, where banks can borrow directly from the Fed. It includes reserve requirements, which dictate how much cash banks must hold, influencing their lending capacity. And it includes the 12 regional Fed banks, which were meant to decentralize power, but in reality, power has always been heavily centralized at the top, particularly with the New York Fed. Here is a statistic from the early days that reveals everything. In 1918, just 5 years after the Fed was created, a mere 5 banks accounted for over 40% of all borrowing from the discount window. This wasn't a broad, equitable system designed to help every bank equally. It was a selective one, right from the start. And this selective access set the template for how modern crises would be handled. As the decades rolled on, one thing became crystal clear. The Federal Reserve's true, ultimate power isn't just in printing money or setting the federal funds rate. Its real influence lies in its control over the emergency credit channels, the ability to decide, in moments of extreme fear and panic, who gets liquidity and who is left to fail. This is the quiet advantage, the invisible lifeline. It is the core mechanism that was built in secrecy on Jekyll Island in 1913, and has been expanded, refined, and deployed for over a century. And the person who helped codify this structure, the intellectual architect behind this system of emergency credit, it's someone whose critical role isn't discussed nearly enough. In part 2 of this series, we will reveal the architect behind this emergency credit system and the specific mechanism that still shapes financial rescues to this very day. You won't believe the name. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this story. Welcome back to part 2. In the last video, we uncovered how the Federal Reserve was born from secrecy, crisis, and a concentration of power. But today we go much deeper, because the real story of the Fed isn't just about interest rates or inflation targets. It's about the hidden emergency liquidity mechanisms buried beneath the surface. These are the systems designed during the Fed's founding and expanded through every single crisis since. If you're ready to understand the true core of our financial system, let's continue. We'll pick up right where we left off. The architect who truly shaped the Fed's emergency credit structure was Paul M. Warburg, a central figure at that secret Jekyll Island meeting. Warburg was convinced the U.S. economy needed more than just another bank. It needed a centralized liquidity machine. Not just a lender of last resort, but a system where private institutions would be the primary channels for emergency credit. This idea was the origin of the discount window, which remains the heart of the Fed's crisis response to this day. Warburg's core argument was that liquidity should always flow through the banking system, never directly to the public. That single design choice created a permanent imbalance, an asymmetry of power. Those closest to the liquidity window are positioned to gain the most when things fall apart. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's the foundational structure that still defines how financial crises play out today. So, let's break down the modern version of this system. It's deceptively simple. A bank needs cash, so it pledges assets, or collateral, to the Fed. In return, the Fed provides instant liquidity, a short-term loan. During normal times, this is a routine function, but in a crisis it becomes a lifeline. It's the tool that decides who survives. Think of it like this. During periods of global stress, central banks around the world use these tools to trade liquidity with each other instantly. They create short-term loans against high-quality collateral to keep the gears of the financial system from grinding to a halt. These mechanisms were created and massively expanded during the crises of 2008 and 2020. All in the name of stabilizing the markets. The numbers behind this are staggering and reveal the true scale of the operation. During the 2008 to 2010 financial crisis, the Fed's emergency lending peaked at $7.7 trillion. Other independent estimates, which count a broader range of facilities, put that number as high as $16 trillion. It was a silent bailout of historic proportions. Fast forward to 2020. The Fed's balance sheet exploded, growing by $3 trillion in just a few months. To put that into perspective, over 30% of all US dollars in existence were created in less than 2 years, between 2020 and 2021. And where did this money go? Historically, data shows that just 5 major banks consumed over 40% of all emergency credit. These aren't accusations. These are the mechanics of the system. This is how it's designed to work. This emergency liquidity does 3 critical things. First, when markets freeze up, liquidity decides who makes it through the storm and who doesn't. Those with access to the Fed's window survive. Those without it are left to fend for themselves. Second, when asset prices collapse, those with fresh liquidity are in a position to buy assets at fire sale prices. Those without it are forced to sell, often at a loss, just to stay afloat. This dynamic is a massive driver of wealth consolidation during a downturn. And third, this creates what economists call moral hazard. Institutions that expect a rescue are incentivized to take on greater risks during the good times, knowing there's a safety net waiting for them. This is precisely why crises don't just happen. They create consolidation. Weaker players are wiped out or absorbed by the stronger ones who are bailed out. This isn't necessarily corruption, it's architecture. It's the inevitable outcome of the system's design. And this liquidity model, born on Jekyll Island in 1910, now completely dominates global finance. We see it everywhere, in the cross-border swap lines between central banks, in the standing repo facilities that provide daily liquidity, and in the endless cycles of quantitative easing. The crisis backstops are no longer a last resort. They are an expected feature of the market. The mechanism created in 1913 didn't disappear. It scaled up, went digital, and went global. And because global markets are so deeply interconnected, A liquidity shock in one region can now trigger a tsunami across the entire world in a matter of minutes. This is why the next major crisis will likely be faster, sharper, and broader than anything the founders of the Fed could have ever imagined. And here is the big, unavoidable truth. The modern financial system functions on borrowed time, borrowed liquidity, and borrowed trust. Crises are not anomalies. They are catalysts. They are events that reinforce and strengthen the very same architecture that was built in 1913. When the music stops and liquidity dries up, the institutions directly connected to the Fed's credit spigots survive first, they stabilize first, and they expand first. Everyone else is left to adjust to the aftermath. This isn't a prediction of doom, it's an explanation of the structure. So, this leaves us with one final critical question. After more than a century of booms and busts, are we any wiser now? Or are we just walking the same old path but in better suits? If this breakdown opened your eyes to the hidden mechanics of our financial world, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know which system you want me to decode next. The global swap lines, the derivatives market, or the world of shadow banking. Let me know below and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks for watching.